listeners, and welcome to a Geek Tragedy. I am Stephen, known online as Plague Metal for various reasons, and I am your host. I will, as always, welcome to the pod the most erudite human and my best friend, Holly Properly. Hello, Holly. How are you?
Hello, I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm not too bad. It's a bit of a long day, but I'm very, very gratified to be here chilling out with you excellent people. So it's making my day much better. The pre-pod has cheered me immensely from a bit of a crap day. And pre-pod's a bit of a weird state, isn't it?
It is.
It
Yeah.
exists in a state of pre-pod. And I would also welcome to the pod our very own salvage man and crafter par excellence, Mark Ola. As we discovered your name was last week, because you usually say hola before I get to the end of your name. Hello, Mark. How are you?
Buenos dias. I'm fine, thank you very much. It's been nice and sunny down here in Cornwall, and good weekend with music and festivals and stuff. So yeah, I'm feeling buoyed.
Yes, your Facebook posts have been inspiring me to listen to some classic bits of music.
Yes.
Not as in classical music.
No,
but I don't know. Is Sting now defined as classical music?
Old.
No.
But I did Fat Boy. I got Fat Boy Slim in there as well, and Blondie and Sting all in one weekend. So I thought it was pretty good, really.
Nice. And I see you've been making casts of your own face in an unusual way.
You're talking about the Scourge planters, aren't you? My goblin planters. Yeah, the first few pulls out of the new mould, and it's working out quite well.
Nice. Yeah, it is nice. And hidden behind the scenes is our illustrious producer Kit, who will be named Kit. That's getting old now, isn't it?
Yeah, I think we need to find a different way to introduce Kit.
Maybe it'd be okay if I just say who should be named and then scream into the microphone really loudly.
Please don't do that. I'll leave if you do that.
Okay, not that then. All right. So we've been on a bit of a groove recently, haven't we? We've been approaching the pod in our own inimitable way with looking at the way stories start in one form and how they move between all sorts of media. And then how that affects them on the way and the changes that happen between book to film to
radio play.
Good. I was going to say poor Meg. Thank you for saving me out there.
Oh my
God. Rule 13. It'll be out there somewhere.
That was close.
To radio play, to video game.
Scratch and sniff card.
Plushie!
Yeah, that's it. There you go. And that led to, in the week, a long chat about how long we want to talk about these things for, if we wanted to develop it a bit further, before we kind of got bored and moved on to something else. And we decided on our format. We're gonna stick with this kind of for a little bit, but we've got quite a long list of special guests that actually want to come on the show, which is quite exciting. Mm-hmm. So we're going to do a couple of episodes, maybe 3. With a couple being directly about the specific stories or format we're talking about, and then that will end with a special guest that will be able to talk about what we've just been talking about. And Mark, for example, has got a special guest in mind for one that's coming up. Mark, do you want to explain to our gentle listeners your exclusive?
Well, I'm really pleased that my old co-worker from Doctor Who, Matt Savage, who's a concept designer on that and who has now moved on to wonderful things. Lots of Star Wars, the newest Aliens, worked on the Halo TV series, and he does hard sci-fi. So, machines, environments, props. Oh, he's worked on Batman as well. So he's a props and vehicles and hard-edged sci-fi designer.
There you go.
He's a lovely bloke too.
Cool. So when we get to the end of some of this stuff, we'll have him on and we'll chat to him. And then probably in an additional pod, so we're going to do like 3 of those maybe in a month, and then the last one we'll just have some guests on to talk about something else, to break up our run of like just one thing, and then we'll do like some guys to talk about I don't know, board games or books or whatever, because then we can have a nice little break. In our conversations, there was one story that has leapt through a whole host of different media formats over its long tenure. Well, it's not really as long as many other things, but it's more of a constant tenure in at least the last 20 years, even though its original story stems back a bit further. It's just kind of been in our faces a lot. And it's jumped from film to books to well, all media really, isn't it? I can't think. It's not been in cartoons. It's been in radio stuff. Yeah, I think it's been through everything.
Lego.
And now it's full of mice.
Well, no, it's part of the mouse.
Oh, that's what I meant to say.
Slightly different.
And it divides opinions, even on this happy pod, quite extensively. And we are, of course, talking about Star Trek.
Wars
Trek. Thanks, Holly. I couldn't.
You would have looked so foolish if you'd got that wrong.
Star Wars, of course, yes. And before we kick this off, I really want to point out that we are not here to critique Star Wars. These next few pods, we'll do Star Wars at some point, but this is just us talking about its journey and how we think its journey has been affected by the different formats that it's been through, and what has become of it. Rather than offering our critique of the show, although I'm certain our points of view will come across firmly, because Mark hates it. He doesn't really. He hates some of it. I mean, we all hate the Christmas special, but less said about that, the better. But yes, let's crack on. Sorry, I'm just waffling now for the sake of it. So shh, Stephen. Where does Star Wars come from? That's kind of my opening pod line. So we'll talk a little bit about its initial formation and ideas. So like whenever we talk about Star Wars, and we watch like The Mandalorian, and we comment about how it's a bit of a western, and we talk about the lightsaber fights, and we talk about how it's like kind of all based in sort of samurai fighting styles, and whenever we kind of discuss what was the inspiration for George Lucas when he wrote it all. There's so many. Do you want me to start this off, or would one of you guys like to jump in?
No, you're on the roll.
Off you go.
We're just going to make a cup of tea.
Yep.
I feel like I'm hogging the microphone, but whatever. So like one of the biggest statements that's ever always been made is Kurosawa's work. Now we discussed for the pod. I'm basically apparently the only fan of Kurosawa, having watched at least 2 of his films, because I really enjoyed Yojimbo and the Seven Samurai, but I've never actually seen Hidden Fortress, which is what apparently Star Wars is strongly based off of. And it is. I mean, I know the plot for Hidden Fortress, and I've seen some of Hidden Fortress, and understand that, like Vader's style is there's a bad guy general sees light at the end, big samurai helmet, similar to Vader's, that kind of thing. That all occurs in it. And 2 bickering peasants who evolve into droids, in Star Wars, and that kind of thing goes on. And in other bits of Kurosawa's work, there's a queen who often switches places with a handmaiden, and there's definitely a lot of the 7 samurai, 7 forms of lightsaber drilling, that kind of stuff all exists there. But seeing as you guys haven't really watched it, and you listeners probably know all this stuff anyway, you just don't hear me waffling about it. Flash Gordon's a good one, because you guys can talk a little bit about Flash Gordon, because I know Holly hasn't seen any of that either.
No, I haven't seen.
But you can
Flash
talk about
Gordon.
something else instead, which we both into earlier. We know that Flash Gordon was a massive influence, particularly the roll up at the start. That's where that comes from, and Lucas really wanted that. Mark, do you want to jump in on Flash Gordon, or are you just happy for me to carry on?
Well, I mean, Flash Gordon was just a tad before my time, so I didn't really get to see the matinees where the cliffhanger, what, he's died again, and then the next episode will be, no, what you didn't know from last episode was this. There's a spare tree hanging just by his feet. So no, that was all a bit before my time. But
you look confused, Holly. It would happen. If you watched even when they watched put it on TV, they left it in, didn't they? When they'd have like the car would go off the cliff, fly through the air, catch fire, and explode.
If you think he must be dead this time.
But in the next episode, it didn't really go off the edge. That was the tree you saw falling off the edge, catching fire and exploding.
I'm just really confused, because the Flash Gordon that I'm thinking of all happens in space.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't get where the car on the
Well,
cliff
I
is
mean,
really kind of coming from.
We just use the car as like a metaphor for a spaceship, really.
No,
Okay.
that was from Rocket Man. I'm using the Rocket Man example. So they Gordon, Buck Rogers, and Rocket Man. They were the old serials, weren't
Yeah.
they? Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, it didn't really matter because Flash Gordon was just basically they would just use any costume they could get hold of. So like the people from Arborea were just guys dressed as Peter Pan. There were like loads of them in like tights and little pants and their forest outfits. They were just all
I mean,
with little
the
hats.
original series made Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space look good. In terms of special effects, I mean, it was shonky as hell, but it was a serialized space adventure.
Yeah.
With a dashing hero and fair maidens and evil galactic overlords and some really, really bad robots, wobbly sets and truly dire spaceships with sparklers shoved up the rockets and then just wobbled across the screen.
Well, you're getting obviously his inspiration for Star Wars.
Yeah, absolutely. You can see every single string in Star Wars.
Well, that's what he wanted. He wanted like to take that on board. He wanted to have Flash Gordon as his stuff, but didn't have the license for it. And there is definitely that whole kind of fighting the Galactic Empire, Ming the Merciless, running his the galaxy.
Yeah.
Bunch of heroes from a little planet in the middle of nowhere turn up. It's only a handful of them, but they represent a larger rebel alliance. And off they go. They do him in. He's got a crack team of bad guys who are dressed in their underwear and have whips or whatever. And there's a giant scorpion that attacks them or something. That was a lizard, wasn't it? It was a big chameleon. Which was superimposed in front of like a little dude. That doesn't happen in Star Wars, obviously. It's a Sarlacc. But you get the idea. That whole theme of like, oh, we must get them, and then you got the hero's journey, and how Lord of the Rings. The myth behind that made Star Wars science fantasy, at least according to George Lucas. I still struggle to see that. I get the science fantasy bit, but the Hobbit really throws me every time.
No, I can see it.
Tell
I
me.
can definitely see it. So
I'm just saying it so someone else speaks.
so like Lord of the Rings is all about the bigger fight, right? It's all about sort of the vastly underprepared people on hobbits on a mission that they are entirely unprepared and very ill-equipped for, against something like this, a great world-consuming evil. But the point of it is the point of Lord of the Rings is always it's fellowship, it's companionship, it's who you meet, sharing the same cause, having that kind of let's go and get the bad guy mentality, no matter how much you don't have, in terms of like
second breakfast. No, I didn't see any Jedi with second breakfast.
Well, exactly, but that's where that kind of comes from. It's that companionship. It's those met that it's those unexpected meetings of people, and the way in which they then influence the trajectory on a very small scale that snowballs into something bigger. Yes, I can see your Harrison Ford and your Chewbacca.
Well, they're having their special companionship, like you said.
It's not that sort of podcast.
It's just hugging. Look, they're just hugging. Chewbacca's arms don't move.
Holly's got a very good point there. Going back on track.
Thank you.
Well,
stay on target. Remember, stay on target. That's what you were telling us. Yes, but it's also that David versus Goliath thing. I was the classic. Yeah, it's the small group of friends, companions, who are massively outgunned as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And
the samurai again.
And part of that as well, though, and I think it's become more obvious in Star Wars than it has in Lord of the Rings, because Star Wars has grown so much larger than Lord of the Rings has. Lord of the Rings is still quite contained within itself, sort of over here, whereas Star Wars has kind of snowballed and exploded.
We'll do the Lord of the Rings pod another day. Carry on.
We will do Lord of the Rings pod another day. But I agree with you, Holly, that Star Wars as a universe is far more expansive than Lord of the Rings. There are far more tales that can be told there.
But like the whole point that where you get the comparison between both of them, and where I think that kind of that comparison lies is more in you are shown snippets of that wider world. You are shown snippets of like or told tales secondhand through unreliable narrators about things happening in places of Middle Earth far, far away, or across the seas or whatever. There are snippets of that wider world shown. That world has always been built in, and it was built in the first Star Wars movies. I mean, it was a stroke of absolute marketing genius to start with 4, 5, and 6 as opposed to 1, 2, and 3. That's one of the best marketing strategies that has
I'm
ever
pretty sure that
been
wasn't his
seen.
plan.
No, but that's how it developed, right? That's what it turned into,
Mhm.
because 1, 2, 3, that's a trilogy. You get an ending there.
Yeah.
Look at Lord of the Rings, 1, 2, 3. There's an ending there.
Do you think he started 4, 5, and 6 because he knew the story for 1, 2, and 3 was really shit?
No, I mean, I just genuinely think that starting a story in the middle, you see it with all the best books and all the best pieces of literature.
yeah.
You drop a character, or you drop the reader or the audience right in the middle of something where they don't have any context, and they have to pick it up all the way through, and they have to take those threads and tug on them and see if there's exposition coming in from somewhere else, because otherwise they'll be totally lost. You start something in the middle, and that is your hooked audience. Then that is your I mean, you should my parents are a fantastic example of this, right? Like, my mum loved Star Wars when I was small, and she never really, like, we went to the cinema to see episode 1 for definite. I don't think we went to see 2 and 3. But when COVID lockdown hit, her and my dad dressed up in dressing gowns with like water guns, and did the whole Leia being rescued by Luke scene, the whole "you're really short for a stormtrooper" like bit, and they just dressed up and did that in their living room for fun.
In dressing gowns.
In dressing gowns. My mum
As Arthur
got some.
Dent.
Basically, yes. My mum got some tight, like, stuffed tights into other tights and made Princess Leia's buns. And my dog just ran around like a lunatic, completely unsure about what was going on. But it was like, these things, they're things that stay with you, and I think they stay with you because you're dropped into the middle of a world that is already incredibly well defined and pre-existing.
So,
and seeing my parents recreate
go on.
Star Wars in their dressing gowns with their hair tied up in stockings would certainly stay with me as well. It's a fascinating insight into your family life. Thank you for sharing that, Holly.
This
Anyway,
is why I am
Stephen,
the way I am.
Well, no, I mean, it would be
perfectly
ridiculous
normal.
for it to dress up in Star Wars kit and, like, do stuff.
That's backwards.
I know.
Yeah,
Right,
that is
good.
backwards.
But yeah, so that's really cool. We kind of stepped away from where we were, but and like what you've said about jumping in the middle and the well-defined universe, we kind of come into in about 3 sections time, because at the start it wasn't very well defined. It was, in fact, a lot of loose ends with no exposition whatsoever, and a lot of what Lucas had in mind, he famous as he has written it and spoken about it, he had a whole concept of like what was going to happen and how it was going to happen, and he had to keep editing and re-editing and chopping it away until he went for the what was going to be one film in A New Hope, and then that was going to be it. But obviously he didn't, and that's why it's 2 Death Stars, because like he wanted to do Death Star better in the later film.
Oh god, he got so obsessed with Death Stars. We can come on to that later.
We can go on to that. So we touched briefly on where stuff came from, right? That we've touched on that briefly. We've spoken about like kind of where the story started and how it moved into the format of George Lucas's brain before it became a script, and that's interesting. I mean, we didn't touch it too much. We kind of tangented off, but that's us. That's where we go. But we didn't talk about Flesh Gordon, so that's good. Which Holly was very keen to before we started.
I think keen is the wrong word, but okay.
But we all know Star Wars, right? So I don't want to talk too much about the actual film, because, like, we know A New Hope, right? Everyone listening to this has probably seen New Hope. If they haven't, you should probably go and watch New Hope so that you know what goes on. What we can talk about is the fact that, like, when the industry came into A New Hope, and George Lucas was very much kind of in this mindset he was going to make these incredible sets, they didn't physically have the means to do it. There were no special effects teams that could make models in the way that he wanted them to. No motion picture companies had that anymore. They're all gone. There wasn't any in the world, so he had to assemble his own team of model makers and kit builders, and he had no money to make it with. So the initial concept of how he wanted to tell this story was entirely locked into model making, right? And we'll talk about the actors in a minute as well, but like the basic concept would not have worked if he hadn't had to build models. And Mark, you were going to tell us about like kind of where that all started and stuff.
Well, I mean, yeah, nothing like it has ever been attempted before. I mean, okay, just a quick thing that when the first one came out, I was 16 years old. I checked the release date in the UK, and it was December 1977. So I'd have been 16-year-old geek, just turned 16. And prior to that, I think the closest thing you'd had in terms of visuals would have been 2001 Space Odyssey, which is why, obviously, George Lucas turned to Dykstra, who had done the space scenes, the effects in 2001, turned to him to go, how are we going to do this? But the thing they had in Star Wars, which they didn't really have in any previous film, was layered, was composite images, and you had these really complicated, basically World War II dogfights going on in space, and none of those could be done in a single shot because there was just so much going on screen. So they came up with this whole computerized motion control where they could basically reproduce an exact controlled camera motion again and again and again. And by doing that, they could layer the images on the films, so you could create real depth in all these star scenes and space fights and dogfights.
And no one had told stories like this before, right? No one had done anything like this.
No, people had told loads of stories. There's nothing really original in Star Wars.
No, I mean like this medium for storytelling, which the techniques you're describing to demonstrate these dogfights. No.
That in terms of technology, Star Wars really broke the mold. It created the mold. Yeah, as I say, nothing had really been seen like this before.
And these are all just storytelling techniques, Mark, because once we were doing shadow plays and then we decided to get up on stage and actually start talking, so things move on and now
they do.
Storytelling develops.
But this was a major leap in technology. Yeah, this wasn't just an incremental step forward. This was a huge bloody leap that they did.
This was all invention, wasn't it? Like from the minute they kind of came out of his head, he went, "I want this done." They had to invent the technique to make his dream actually occur.
Absolutely, and that CGI was not a thing back then. Computer graphics were virtually primitive. I don't even know whether Pong had come out at that point, but probably
had.
Probably had, but that was more or less the level of computer graphics back then. So all of it's done practical. And that they really created this. I think it's probably safe to say they really created the whole thing of kit bashing, where they would buy up loads of Airfix kits, just boxes and boxes and boxes of Airfix kits to detail all the spaceships, which is glorious. And
glory.
It was, because it's just beautiful. The amount of detail on those ships,
and with no budget.
The entire production budget for the first Star Wars film was $11 million, something like that.
Do you know where they got most of that from?
Was it Mormons?
It was pre-selling the rights to their action figures. They got loads of money, and they got into this really shitty deal with I want to say Kenner for they had the rights to all of their stuff forever, and they were getting like very little money out of it because they'd got some up front. And that's one of the reasons that people believe that the next set of films didn't come out for 20 years, because it came out suspiciously just short of when the Kenner contract ran out. Then this new film came out.
Yeah, well, I don't think George Lucas did too bad off the toy sales and the merchandise sales. He's had something like 40% profit from all of those, and all the kids.
They didn't have much money. They invented the whole thing, and it was glorious. It was gorgeous. It was. You know, I was going to say a film that had come out just beforehand. They rushed out Star Trek, the motion picture, because they were both destined to come out near each other. But they rushed Star Trek through, and you can really tell that they didn't bother doing what Star Wars had done. You know, with their efforts to make their film look amazing. And they had a much bigger budget.
The thing about Star Wars, right through to today, is the design work, the concept work that's gone into it. Yeah, the spaceships were pretty much unique when they first came out. The X-wings, the TIE fighters were beautiful design. You'd never seen anything quite like that. You hadn't seen anything like the Millennium Falcon. You'd never really even seen something like the Star Destroyers. And they've all been they've all been inspirational to lots of other things like Battlestar Galactica and those images and those styles of ships have just inspired so many others. But it started there, and it started. It also, the entire world was used, not like 2001 where everything was pristine and clean and very sterile. This was a used world. And it was kind of the first time we'd seen that as well. So I'm frothing about the look.
No, I'm just going to butt in for a second.
Me, that's what made it
just to let
special.
people know that if this is your first listen to our pod, or if you don't know who Mark Cordory is, this is Mark's real world life. Is he has dressed sets for things like Doctor Who and works on
things like Doctor Who. Full stop.
Well, yeah,
but thanks for trying to big me up.
He has worked on lots of other projects as well. Nightmare Before Christmas was that one? That one up.
Corpse Bride.
Corpse Bride.
Corpse Bride.
There we go, and stuff like that. So. These are where you drew your inspirations from, to do the stuff that you did. So he knows his shit. But we're talking about. It sounds like I'm talking about A New Hope, but realistically, what I wanted to move into next was kind of what we thought about how when they went into the second making of films, they kind of abandoned a lot of their model making and went directly into, CGI work. I mean, they made stuff like land speeders, but only so they could put them they could put people in them physically and wiggle them around a bit. And then put them against a completely CGI backdrop. So I mean, obviously, you've got some really cool stuff that happened in things like A New Hope, where they had to take out the original Jabba because they had a bloke played Jabba.
In that big bloke in a fur jacket.
Yeah, and they replaced him with the Hutt in the Return of the Jedi, but they didn't put that back in until they re-released it in. The early noughties when they CGI'd Jabba into A New Hope.
Awful.
And it was pretty rubbish.
But all of the remasterings were. I mean, what was the point in making Ewoks blink? What?
Well, maybe the Ewoks said, if you had your eyes open for 25 years, it's going to start getting a bit hurty. So
a little bit dry, but
okay, so I can see some bits. There's a really nice opening scene in the original Star Wars on Tatooine, right, where the droids are wandering across Tatooine, and in the background there's what I thought was forever hills, but it is actually supposed to always have been a big skeleton of a dead crate dragon or something. And for years I just thought it was a blurry hill, and then when they remastered it, it looks like a skeletal beast in the background. I thought that's cool. That's a good thing to brush up if that's what it was supposed to be in the first place. So some of it's kind of all right, but largely speaking, I think in the second bunch of films, replacing everything more or less CGI was really awful.
But it wasn't the only one prone to going, hey, CGI, we can throw all the other tools out now. We'll never need a model making department ever again because we can do it all on computers. And there was a whole period of filmmaking, sci-fi, fantasy, whatever, where it was just CGI.
And it was terrible.
They have not dated well.
No, and you can see that now in the resurgence of model making, in the resurgence of animatronics, in the resurgence of really fantastic kind of characterization that's done with robotics rather than being sort of just CGI'd just because you can.
Motion capture
and
stuff.
Yeah, and absolutely, and I think Star Wars as a franchise, has kind of been a huge part of re-pioneering that way of working,
Mm.
because you look at things like The Mandalorian and you look at things like Grogu.
Under new management, though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, absolutely. All hail the mouse.
Well,
Can I
it's also
interruption point. Can I ask if you've seen the new animatronic alien, the face hugger?
yes, I
Mm-mm.
saw the clip of it.
Don't watch it, Holly.
Is it
What?
Romulus?
It looks
Alien
incredibly realistic, and all of its movements, especially it's kind of I've seen you and I'm going to go at you movements.
Oh no, I don't. Oh no,
It's honestly phenomenal. I was like,
Sometimes-
this is incredibly good. But
Holly, what's that on the back of your
No,
chair?
don't, because sometimes, honestly, sometimes I need things to be a little bit naff. Like like for my own sanity, I need to be able to see like that the lines are too sharp around the edges, and it's definitely CGI. Otherwise, I get a bit scared.
But yeah, I think you're right. And the droid in Andor was tremendous, and I've forgotten what the droid from Andor was called.
Oh,
It's probably my favourite droid that I've seen doing this.
yes. I can't remember. Hang on, I'm going
Mark,
to
you
look up.
actually watched Andor, didn't you?
Yeah, I actually enjoyed Andor. That's the only one of the series that I've watched the entire thing for, because again, I'll come clean now. I have similar feelings to Star Wars now as I do to Lord of the Rings, in the sense that I think I'm just more or less down on both franchises, because we were saying before that Star Wars has a huge universes to explore, so many tales to tell, and yet it always seems to come back to a Death Star thing. And anyway, we won't go on to my bitterness about the storytelling.
We can have a whole pod on your bitterness at a later date.
I can rave about the visuals till the cows come home.
What was the
visuals have always been?
Holly?
B2.
B2. There we go. Thank you. Well, what was the droid's designation? So do we think? Like, I think we're saying basically that, like, when the CGI happened. I mean, so when we watch the 1, 2, and 3 films, obviously we're older than we were. Like, I watched, like Mark did. I watched Star Wars when I was a child. When you were a teenager, I was a child. And there's all that magic of being a kid and watching it for the first time. And the second set of films, you're older, so you're coming at them from a different angle, and you're looking at the story in a different way. So I found that the second set of films, I'm not going to go into the third set of films, they're all right. They weren't awful. I went to see I've forgotten the name of the first one.
Phantom Menace.
Phantom Menace, thank you. At the cinema for May the 4th with my son, who also thinks it's all right, but not as good as the first 3. And it was still good, but like I say, the special effects, a lot of it was a bit CGI was kind of
naff.
You get bored watching it. It's not alive enough. It didn't have that.
It doesn't have any vitality to it, does it? That's the thing.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
You could see the pilots wrestling with their X-wings and stuff. And the droids moving because there were people in them. And they were cool. And it was, it just looks.
I mean, I never got the thing about actually having to put somebody in R2-D2 though. So, did he really need to be there, or were you just punishing him in a sweaty bin in the middle of the desert?
Isn't he?
Well, there are various tales about what Danny Baker was doing inside R2-D2 while they were filming, which we won't go into. But
please don't ruin my childhood.
Well, sorry, I'm sure you can look it up online if you want.
I don't want
if you want your childhood ruined.
Well, I think. All right, let's put it this way. I think Anthony Daniels would. I don't think C-3PO would be C-3PO without Anthony Daniels in it.
No, absolutely, he made that character because originally George Lucas had envisioned C-3PO as like a used car salesman character. That was the voice that he was going to go for. But obviously the motions, the movement that Anthony Daniel did, which was quite delicate movements, would not have translated to a, yo, go and buy a used spaceship. kind of, it wouldn't have worked. So Anthony Daniels created basically the entire character by his movements dictated what his.
What's Mark doing there, Holly? Is he destroying your?
No, because all I have in my head now is, do you remember the film Matilda, based off Roald
Mhm.
Dahl's Matilda, and how Matilda's father is a used car salesman / dodgy mechanic kind of guy, right? And he epitomizes that voice and style and tone in my head. He is played by Danny DeVito, so all I've got in my head now is a C-3PO sounding and looking like Danny DeVito.
You'd never fit a Danny DeVito in that costume, though. His legs wouldn't have reached the ground.
Are you saying you've been better off as R2D2?
Yeah, probably.
So it's
Or
about
an
actors
Ewok.
now, and that's good because that kind of rolls into the last little bit I want to talk about in this whole thing, because it was also it could have been a very different film and a very different method of storytelling, because and they've stuck with this, realistically speaking, because in the New Hope they just picked up actors that no one knew. Mark Hamill was a TV actor, he didn't do anything. Carrie Fisher was like 19, and Harrison Ford wasn't going to be in it because a lot of other people were on board for the part, but he was doing the reading for Han Solo for the other actors and kind of got the job that way. Who was going to be Han Solo?
So ultimately, obviously, it ended up going to the ever wonderful Harrison Ford, who holds a huge place in my heart, always, for being two of the biggest heroes ever that I had growing up in Han Solo and Harrison Ford. We are going to die. You're doing the pointy thing.
Han Solo, Harrison Ford always points in all of his.
So pointy. He's a
He's
very
really
pointy
pointy
man.
all the stuff that he's ever in. Loads of pointy going on.
Yeah, he leads
He acts with these fingers a lot.
Leads with his index finger, Harrison
So
Ford.
if you're just listening to that, I'm doing a lot of pointing into the camera.
Yeah.
And Mark is very confused.
But people like Christopher Walken, Al Pacino, Nick Nolte, and Kurt Russell all tried out for Harrison Ford. All tried out for Han Solo.
I want to be Harrison Ford.
Great.
Just in front of him trying out, and he was like, "Oh, I like your moves."
One day, my brain will engage before words come out of my mouth. Then
is this pod going to be called "Trying Out for Harrison Ford"?
Trying out for Harrison Ford. I love it. Mark Hamill obviously was cast as Luke Skywalker, ultimately leading to one of the best possible actors for that role. But other actors that auditioned included 3 people I've never heard of, which is probably my bad. Robbie Benson, William Catt, and Charles Martin Smith, who I've never heard of.
Oh yeah,
relatively unknown. And also Kurt Russell, who really, really wanted to be in Star Wars by all accounts, because he was right there for Han Solo. Hey,
I wanted to climb inside Harrison Ford.
It's my obsession. I've had a little crush on Harrison Ford since I was, like knee high to a grasshopper. So, I love him. Absolutely love him. Ugh, he's just so grumpy. It's just brilliant. And then Princess Leia famously was going to be Jodie Foster.
Yes.
And she turned it down to star in a Disney movie instead, and so it went to Carrie Fisher. And again, Carrie Fisher is inimitable. She is just she is Princess Leia. I think the only other role that Carrie Fisher did for me that would ever kind of compare to her Princess Leia sassiness was her role in Blues Brothers.
I was going to say it's me, Blues Brothers, isn't it?
Yeah, and I absolutely adore her. And I think,
go on.
Well, a lot of people talk about, like films sort of, like where you start to realize that maybe you're not entirely straight all the way through, and I think Star Wars was that movie for me, without, or at least, well, maybe it was just the franchise in general, but like they picked a very good cast.
Yeah, Jabba turned me.
Of course he did. the Hutt or the guy in the big fur coat?
Both.
Excellent.
First the Hutt, and then the guy in the big fur coat.
But yeah, so it could have been a very different movie. You could have been looking at Christopher Walken, Kurt Russell, and Jodie Foster.
I wonder if it would have stopped there if it had been a different cast, because I mean, like they would have all gone on to different things probably. I don't think they made a second bunch of films of them in.
I wonder if what happened to the Percy Jackson movie would have happened
I was
to
actually going to say,
Star Wars.
I wonder if Harrison Ford would have been Indiana Jones in 3 films at that point if he hadn't done a trilogy in Star Wars and it had been so successful.
Mm.
You know,
One of my relatives was the director of photography on the Indiana Jones trilogy.
small world again.
Yeah.
But like in the next bunch of films, they did more or less the same thing, right? I mean, Ewan McGregor, obviously, and
Hayden Christensen.
yeah, but he wasn't big and famous.
No, that's my point.
Ewan
He
McGregor
wasn't
had
big
been
and
in like
famous.
Train Spotting and a few other bits and pieces. So I mean, they were still quite small. But you had Qui-Gon, obviously. We've really researched this well because we should know this.
Liam Neeson.
Yeah, Liam Neeson was a well-known name.
I mean, I genuinely, and I'm probably going to get quite a lot of flack for this, but I think that the one actor in 1, 2, and 3 that wasn't cast right was Mace Windu. Samuel L. Jackson in Star Wars just do not correspond in my head because he's always
motherfucker.
It's a
yeah
motherfucking Death Star.
Yeah.
Because he can't, like, it feels like he's kind of like really constrained and really narrowed by being a Jedi, and that it's just it shouldn't.
The Jedi Council does not grant you the rank of master, motherfucker.
Exactly. I think it would have been maybe it would have been a better film for that.
Maybe. I mean, Yoda should have had those lines as well. Fuck a mother would have been. Fuck her mother. Would have been amazing. But I mean, we haven't touched on Yoda and puppetry and all those kind of things that just kind of went out the window. After Star Wars, a lot of Yoda's scenes are just CGI Yoda in.
Yeah, the leaping around like a flea. But I mean, getting Henson's and the Muppets in to create Yoda and bringing in the skills of a proper puppeteering company and proper puppeteers to create a character which was alive. And I don't think I'm trying to think of the timeline, but I don't think there had really been a puppet
Only thing I can think
main
of is Dark
character.
Crystal.
Yeah,
Well,
I mean, that's what I'm trying to think of. Where was that in the
80s.
timeline? But yeah, it was later. So I think Yoda probably represented, if not the first, then at least one of the first puppeteered characters in a live-action film.
And when did the Muppet movies come out?
Yeah, see, I still think probably later.
Okay.
Hang on.
I mean, Holly was saying before we started this off, it would change again when they went to the Mandalorian and people were just hurling Grogu through the air.
Yeah, there are so many stories about because they built little teeny tiny Grogus and he was puppeted and they did have to just launch him across rooms and make him do spins and stuff without without kind of resorting to CGI. And I love the fact that now you have to people are saying that they're resorting to CGI and that kind of sort of special effect rather than it being just the standard. And the first Muppet movie came out in 1979.
Okay, same year then. Oh well,
no, 2 years later.
That would have preempted Yoda, yeah.
Yeah, because it was 2 years after New Hope.
Yes, but before Return of the Jedi.
So
yeah,
that was 1980, wasn't it?
It was 83, I think, wasn't it? Return of the Jedi.
So
anyway,
it was 83.
Certainly afterwards, and I don't think you can really count Chewbacca as a Muppet. He's close, but no cigar. But I mean, maybe some of the stuff. I mean, main character, right? I mean, maybe some of the stuff in the bar. Anyway, stay on target. So, we're obliged to say, I think, from our point of view, that CGI was fucking shit, and they should have stuck with their original concept of model making, puppetry, which they've gone back to now, animatronics, that kind of stuff, and people in the costumes being,
they've got a balance back. CGI is a tool in the box, but it's not the only tool. But for a while, it felt like it was the only tool in the box.
But we're pleased that they've stuck with, largely speaking, in most of the way through, they've stuck with new cast that they're not bringing in big names to sell their show.
It doesn't need selling that in that way, though.
Exactly. They learned their lesson in the first bunch of films. And we're like, we don't need fucking big names to make our show work. We've got Peter Cushing, and we've got Alec Guinness,
who did not want to be there under
he
any
didn't.
circumstances.
He didn't. And
No, but he
a big-
never had to work
well,
again if he didn't want to after that.
and it's a real shame that Alec Guinness kind of made light of Star Wars, because it was a glorious thing.
There are two ways to embrace that, aren't there? There's the Alec Guinness way of embracing it, which is to not embrace it at all in the slightest, and to be quite rude about it, even though like it was huge and you did a good job. And then there's the Patrick Stewart way of doing it, where because they're both obviously actors with huge theatrical backgrounds and Shakespearean backgrounds, and Patrick Stewart like decided that yes, he'd say yes to Star Trek, and he'd just do a season and see how it panned out. Then he had to sign up for 7 seasons because that was mandatory, and he was sort of like, well, maybe I could, maybe I couldn't, and then just threw himself in with full gusto. So if there's ever, like an opportunity where you're thinking of embarking on something that might not be entirely up your street, think about whether you'd like to be an Alec Guinness or a Patrick Stewart.
I still think Patrick Stewart's best line is for the X-Men, when they took him into the studio and showed him a comic with Charles Xavier in the front, and he said, "Why am I on the front cover of this comic?" And they went, "Because you're going to be in the film," which I think is great because he'd never seen the X-Men before. But yes, so we're agreed on that, actors and stuff. That's all cool. And I'm really glad that they stuck with the whole kind of space opera aspect, which we didn't really get into talk about, but we just need to kind of move on. Because we've got probably enough time to talk about the next bit, but we really enjoyed that first part, and that was pretty cool. And we can run over a little bit. So I wanted to talk now about the way that once the first 3 films have been made, and again, like we could talk about the first 3 films and plot and everything else, but that's for another pod. This is more about storytelling. The whole thing ground to a quivering halt. Yeah, they were the dead years of Star Wars. They bought out the Ewoks films. And the Caravan of Courage, and they made the Droids cartoon, if you remember the Droids cartoon, which I used to wait to come on TV. I was so happy when it came on because it was more Star Wars, and we wanted more. We were thirsty for Star Wars. And then, some novels had appeared to fill in some of the gaps. There was some stuff about Han Solo and some stuff about Lando Calrissian, but nothing really kind of major. And everyone thought it was all over. And then the West End Games and Bill Slavicsek and people brought out the Star Wars, the role-playing game, which missed thousands, millions of Star Wars fans, right? Not a lot of them that existed. If you are a role player and you've heard of Star Wars, not the West End Games one, it was a D6 system. It was based off of the Ghostbusters game that came out a year or so beforehand. It was a great little system. Had some pre-generated character. Look, here it is. Had some pre-generated characters in the back where you got to play stuff like bounty hunters or retired Imperial captains, smugglers, tongue-tied engineers. They're all very kind of loyal retainer, the merc, laconic scout, drunk Jedi, I think was one of them.
Excellent.
And yeah, it was a great little game. But the really big thing about this whole experience of Star Wars was that the guys that wrote it were allowed to go to, or legend says they were allowed to go to Skywalker Ranch and go around the sets and soak up the atmosphere and write fucking tons of material about Star Wars. None of it was canon. They went away with it, wrote it all down, and made the game and loads and loads of source books, right? And this was all very quietly happening in the background. I don't know if you played the Star Wars game, Mark, in the 80s.
Nope.
It was really good fun. I very much enjoyed it. I've spoken about it before. I'm absolutely certain on this pod in one of its iterations. And it gave us a chance to kind of like start telling stories in the Star Wars universe ourselves. And as young storytellers and role players and stuff, we'd started learning words like Twi'leks. We learned that there was a dude, apparently, the guy, Bib Fortuna, we know who he is, right? Who is Jabba's Twi'lek guy, the one that opens the door to Luke Skywalker in Return of the Jedi, and he's like, what's up? What do you want, man? And he's like, I want to see Jabba, bitch. And he's like, well, no, fuck off. We can't see him. And Luke's all like, "You will take me to Jabba now," and he's like, "I would take you to Jabba now." That dude who then leads him in.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what Star Wars would have been like if it had been set in North London.
No, because I would have used the word geezer. And that's just from my youth.
Jabba, you slag.
I don't think anyone says that anymore. But yeah, and I learned that he was a Twi'lek, and I was like, "What the fuck is a Twi'lek?" So I got to find out what a Twi'lek was, and Rhodians, and which is what Greedo is, obviously. He wasn't anything. He wasn't a Rhodian when they made the film. He was a Rhodian when they wrote the Star Wars role-playing game. And Corellia and places kind of came into existence where Han Solo was from. All the backstories kind of started to get ironed out, and this entire universe sprung into life for the role-playing game. It just didn't exist before. And I want you to take a second to get your heads around that, because what we're saying is that, like, all the stuff that George Lucas wrote was just a bunch of plot with, some action in it and whatever, but there was no extended universe. Stuff that Holly was talking about earlier, this whole like kind of concept that there were all these strands and clues as this greater kind of universe. Stuff like Cloud City, right? That's just nods towards things like Flash Gordon.
It was stuff that could have been picked up at a later date and then handily was by West End Games.
But there were only like one or two words. There was nothing really in there that kind of gave the universe any oomph. There was no. What are these races? What species is this? It's a non-human. What kind of non-human? Non-human. I mean, he did. Lucas did do nice things. Like he gave the jazz that the guys in the cantina are playing. What's that called, Holly?
Oh no, I don't want to. No,
What's it called, Holly?
No, don't make me do it.
Make
Mark say jizz. Why is it always me?
I mean, yeah, he did do some bits. What should we call the jazz? Let's call it jizz. Are you sure, George?
George.
Very innocent man.
What should we name the people that are playing jizz? Not humans. Great work, George.
So it's non-human jizz then.
Yes, non-human jizz.
Right. Delightful.
But yeah, so like they went away and they did this, and they wrote. They created a huge universe, and people started to have theories and stories, and it just went off. The whole story of Star Wars continued on after those films had finished, and it rolled on and on and on and on. And the past was spoken about, the future was spoken about. Some of it remains canon, some of it doesn't. But I'm gonna get you. Do you want to go back to Pizan? Is that where you're going to go with this?
Well, I was going to in a sec. I would love to talk about.
Have you got a question for me?
But no. So what I was kind of just picking up on that point, and then it might evolve into a question.
Go on.
Is the whole idea that hang on, what were you talking about again?
Star Wars.
Thanks, Mark.
The story going on the past, the future.
Oh, yeah. So my thing, and I will be the first person to admit that, like, I love Star Wars. I love Star Wars. I know fuck all about Star Wars in reality. I talk to people like our friend John, who knows everything about Star Wars.
Get well soon, John.
Get well soon, John. It is quite overwhelming, the sheer amount of information that is available. And so, I'll say that I love Star Wars. I am wildly aware that I don't know very much about it at all. And so when new things come out, sometimes it's actually really difficult for me to slot those things into a timeline and to remember kind of how it all goes around that. And I kind of wonder if maybe the internet is sort of responsible for being able to keep people actually on track.
You mean Wikipedia?
Yeah, Wikipedia.
Wikipedia is handy.
Yeah.
I will admit that I know basically bugger all about Star Wars beyond the first three films. For me, basically, it's just some very pretty pictures.
So, okay, alongside the role-playing game, there were Marvel comics, right? That had happened. Yeah. Marvel had released some comics in the late 70s and early 80s, and they had some stories in them that started to become relevant. Do you remember any of them, Mark?
I remember reading the UK sort of reprints that Marvel released. Interesting Marvel-related thing was, I don't know what characters they were, but apparently George Lucas was inspired by a number of Marvel characters and things which were going around at the time. So I don't know where those. I mean, I can't see C-3PO as Iron Man, for example. But anyway,
No, he'd be
No,
but yeah,
I'm not saying guess the Marvel character. We
no,
haven't.
Jarvis. He'd be Jarvis.
possibly. But I just read that on Wikipedia that apparently George Lucas was inspired by some of his character designs. I think as much as anything by some Marvel characters which are going around at the
So
time.
those things had happened.
Those things happen, but the Marvel Star Wars stories which came out, I remember reading those as a kid when I was, well, not, I wouldn't have been as a kid, would it? I'd have been a teenager and should probably have stopped reading comics by that point, but I haven't because I'm a geek. But I can't remember any stories which might have been created by Marvel. Just put your book down.
It's a comic.
Yeah, I've got loads of comics, but I can't remember any of the ones which Marvel produced for Star Wars. But they were run for a fair few years.
Well, they're still going, but
well, there you are. Quite a fair few
my point
years.
is going to be that like this information all fed into like the West End Games franchise, and the role playing game, and you know, so many source books and source material, and obviously we as people would create our own stories, and eventually they would go onto the internet when the internet appeared, and forums started, and whole universes created by refs just sort of edged their way into the ecosystem of Star Wars. And some of them were so good that people kind of took those and they became little source books or side source books. And then when the 90s happened, and we're at the end soon, so I'm just going to start touching on books. When the 90s happened, Timothy Zahn wanted to write some Star Wars books. He was commissioned to basically do some Star Wars books. And he wrote characters which are being used now in the current Star Wars iteration, which has been canon by Disney. When he turned up and like George Lucas said, "Oh, if you want to write books, I'm no good to you, mate. I don't know fucking anything about the Star Wars universe. Go and speak to the guys at West End Games." So he went and spoke to the guys at West End Games and took all the role playing material that had been written by those guys and the refs and storytellers from around the world that filled its way onto forums and stuff. And he took all that information and he turned it into like the whole concept of the Thrawn trilogy. Just like everything that he wrote from that point onwards was based out of these books, and they have become the groundwork for the next 6 films, and then everything that is now being canoned by Disney is all finding its feet and foundation in the fact that the Star Wars game was created by West End Games in the 80s. Without it, there would be no the fact that the story was sucked into that medium, given order, and then sent back out into the world is the only reason, in my opinion anyway, that we have Star Wars in the format we have it in now.
I agree with you, and I mean just for I genuinely believe that Timothy Zahn created the greatest villain that the franchise has ever seen, and possibly a lot of other franchises too.
Did he create Jar Jar Binks?
No, Jar Jar Binks exists on an entirely separate level of villaindom that nobody else can ever replicate. Stupid and
or
annoying
wants to.
bastard. But no, he created Grand Admiral Thrawn, and Thrawn is, without a shadow of a doubt, one of the best villains I've ever read in literature.
Who is Thrawn? I have no idea who this character is.
He's a very difficult character to describe without giving you a load of reference points, and we probably don't have time to do that today, but we can point you at some literature if you fancy a read.
Oh, no, I was just hoping you'd tell me.
He's big and blue.
I can tell you.
That's enough. That's all I needed to know.
He's a shit, isn't he? Anyway, look, we can see about him later on, but I think that sets us nicely into for next time a chat about the books. But yeah, I stand by that. I really stand by the fact that the role-playing game changed everything. It's great, and I find it amazing because I got to be a part of that. Me and others like me were playing West End Games Star Wars back in the 80s, and on the forums chatting about like theories and stuff. Going to Gen Cons and sitting and listening to the guys in lectures halls about West End Games and asking them questions, and you really feel part of the process if you live through that bit, and I find that amazing. I think that's wonderful. I think that's a really big testament to the hobby that we've, like, all three of us have kind of grown up with, role playing, and how this story has entered our medium, and especially in the 80s when it was like denigrated, and people hated role players and thought we were all Satanists and whatever. And it entered our medium, and we reshaped it and sent it back out again, and it survived because that happened. I think that's amazing. That makes me feel really warm and fuzzy inside. I'm very happy.
We can't really follow that up.
I got nothing.
Enjoy your warm, fuzzy feeling of ownership.
I mean,
Thanks, I will. You should share in that. We're all role players. But yeah, so we've run out of time. We're done. We've done our hours, so it's going to be the outro. So next time we will pick this up again, because I quite enjoyed talking today. Did you guys enjoy talking about Star Wars today?
Enjoyed listening to you, yes.
Oh, shut up. You talked about not making new stuff. You grumpy bugger.
yes, I very much did. I'm very much looking forward to when we go on to books and TV and plushies, because that is where I shine in terms of Star Wars. So that's gonna be fun for me,
Cool.
not necessarily for everybody else. But
Okay. So that is us, beautiful people. There is still certainly a middle and end to this journey to go through with the Star Wars stuff, and we'll see what we can cover in the next pod. But in the meantime, we'll keep plugging away the fact that we're going to be at Fantasy Forest in a month now.
Barely even started.
In the middle of July, somewhere, we'll be at Fantasy Forest. Go and look it up. We'll be live on stage. Buy me, only a month. You can come and see us there. We'll say hello to you and wave things that you undoubtedly, Miss Properly will have plushes, and Mark will have a hammock. I will have, I don't know what I'll have, but it'll be cool. Cooler than your plushies and hammocks.
maybe we could get a hammock and fill it with plushies.
I was going to say I could bring a hammock in a plushie. That'd be weird. You can put it out the middle.
Like pulling a hammock out of its arse. Like a back.
Okay, this is ending badly. Right, so it's...
we can edit that last bit out, can't we? Yeah,
Yes.
we can edit that out, I'm sure.
It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
Thank you very much. It's the Power of the Forest. Goodbye. Have an amazing week, people. We love you very much.
Bye.
We are going now. You have been listening to A Geek Tragedy with me, Plague Mantle, and my best friend, the excellent Holly Properly, and our actually famous guy, Mark Cordory. If you like this, there is plenty more at patreon.com/A Geek Tragedy. Production is by Kit Britnell. Our logo and artwork is by markcordory.com. Music is by Borislaw Kozielski. Follow us on Instagram and Facebook at A Geek Tragedy. Email us at geektragedypodcast@gmail.com. Subscribe, leave us a rating and a review. And don't forget to tell all your geeky friends. Also, a big shout out to all of our genius geeks. We adore each and every one of you. And of course, much love. Take care of each other.